Today, two of New York's finest were shot and killed with no warning, no provocation. They were, quite simply, assassinated, targeted for their uniform and for the responsibility.
Hear It Out podcast. I'm Kyle, your co-host. This is theoretically episode 2, but it's episode 1 for us, so we'll dive into some new topics that you guys want to hear about. Joined here by my co-host, Nick.
Hello. Thank you guys again for coming. I really appreciate all the support from everybody that's reached out to us. Quite a few ideas have come out, topics for suggestion, and we really appreciate them. So please keep them coming. You can go to www.heroedout.com. That's HERODOUT.com. Or if you want to just shoot us an email, you can go to heroedoutofficial@gmail.com and just keep sending them over to us. And we'll, as we cruise into them, we'll go ahead and pick them off one by one and try to give you guys some more content. So today, one thing I wanted to talk about was an alarming statistic I read in a recent news story. So Christopher Wray is the director of the FBI, and he testified before Congress earlier in April about the rise in violence, not committed by police, but committed on police, committed to them. And he has some statistics that I pulled up that I wanted to just throw out there real quick that are absolutely insane. It just kind of brings up why is society taking a different view of law enforcement in general? Like what is their stance behind their actions? So obviously you always have lone wolves, you have people that have vendettas, but the overall picture seems to be increasing. So 2021, law enforcement officers, the murder, not just line of duty deaths that are car crashes or, sickness, heart attack on duty, so on and so forth.
COVID.
People feloniously murdered was up 59%. 59%. National murder rate was only up 29%. So law enforcement was killed at a rate 30 percentage points greater than the national average. I mean, right there is a complete disparity. There's nearly one LEO killed every 5 days. So once a week, we are going to be burying somebody. And of those 5, that's not, again, considered line of duty death. These are just murdered. In ambush style killings or even just killed on calls for service, which is the last statistic they pulled up. They said that 73% that were killed of the total killed were in ambush style attacks.
Right. And when you look at that, that's kind of crazy, right? You think of, a war on cops, so to speak. It really is, because we have our military literally at war. When they were at war, cops are getting killed at a greater rate than that by our own citizens.
And I think that's one thing to take from. These are your friends, these are your neighbors, these are your colleagues, are people that are in there every day. We're not going to, in country in a foreign theater, even if you are fighting a uniformed force or a force that's not, I mean, the idea is you're there to help these citizens, and your job is not combat, where if you were a combat infantryman, that would be your assignment. So it's really crazy. These statistics are popping up. In April of 2022, so far, we've lost over 100 law enforcement officers, 101 to date, actually, 101. So to me, that there is a bigger issue at foot on how society sees law enforcement and they see how we police. So I really wanted to kind of dive into that. And I didn't want to go too much into statistics and just kind of bury you guys with numbers, but kind of give you an idea what I think part of the problem is. And, that's one of the things I want to kick it over to you is, what do you think one of the main causes, what are one of the root issues in the way society perceives law enforcement and the way we police today?
I think it has a lot to do with the messaging, from internal administration, the media, of course, social media. You only see the bad stuff, right?
Right.
And especially now with these body-worn cameras, I don't think society is really ready to see in action what policing actually is. A dog bite looks really bad. It looks even worse on a camera.
It does. And I think the one thing that they forget is this is not made for TV. It's not. Society is ugly. Sometimes you have to do painful things to people to gain compliance. And I know it sounds stupid, but one of the techniques that we have in law enforcement is called pain compliance. It's, using different methods and techniques to gain compliance somebody through pain. And you may not like that, but that is the preferred and probably least effective option available outside of just, actual using your noodle.
Right. Transparency, I think, has been a big thorn for law enforcement. I think it's overused, completely overused. Case in point, we had a deputy that was rolling up to a vehicle, on a felony stop and a couple 100 yards away, and then all 4 doors pop open. So the deputy unclicks her seatbelt, takes him down, takes him into custody, whatever. but the car was still rolling. Well, in the interest of transparency, she was written up for operating her vehicle without her seatbelt on, which ultimately led her to leave.
Yeah. My question is, even on a bigger picture, what's the drive in this? Like, I understand society wants, there has to be a level of transparency, and I understand the need to show that we're doing the right things for the right reason. But if we are exposing ourselves to greater risk, either knowingly or even unknowingly, what's the ripple effect of these decisions? Especially even administratively, when you start putting policies in place, there's going to be different interpretations, different opinions, which is completely okay. I think they should be, but they should also be heard. And I know one thing that we had discussed off air and numerous times before is body worn cameras. They actually have a delay. So you can set the delay, whether it's 30 seconds, 0 seconds, 90 seconds. You can kind of go back and see what happened just prior to this. But there comes an issue, which one thing that I think we had discussed, we get into greater detail at another time, was, what did it capture that was not relevant to the event that is now being used as discipline? And I think that's problematic. And I think that's also causing some discontent.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think body-worn cameras are a useful tool, especially for evidence and things like that. But I think there's too much weight that's put on those because it doesn't capture everything. It doesn't. The forward-facing thing. It doesn't capture the 3D image or sound of something coming from somewhere. And then, of course, then it gives you really the ability to Monday morning quarterback everything, which I think that is a huge aspect of why there's been hesitancy or, depolicing, proactively depolicing each other, is because they're just afraid to lose their job. Like, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. And I think being easier to discipline or more apt to discipline, I think is problematic because you find people are less likely to do things. And then you're almost establishing that these people are problem children. And if there is a major incident, I think about this, like if I was a defense attorney and they're like, your guy was an officer involved shooting and everything seemed to be on the up and up, right? But then he goes, your personnel file, well, you had 27 write-ups for various offenses. I think it would be fairly easy for a defense counsel to create doubt and say, well, is this guy actually legitimately trained? Does he take his job serious? Does he know not look at the biggest, the totality of the circumstances, look at all the scenarios. But I feel like that we are maybe not looking at anything that could subject somebody to maybe, criminal prosecution later or adversely affect them in that regard.
Yeah. Obviously, I think everybody needs to be held accountable, especially law enforcement, it's internal. But when you have these series of bullshit write-ups, those are going to stay with you or whoever and be weaponized or could be weaponized, like you said, in court. If a defense attorney walks up there and you're in a shooting, it's not even a questionable one, but they just walk up and say, hey, jury, officer so-and-so has 27 write-ups. It doesn't say what it is. Well, that sounds shocking.
Right.
Because how many times in a,
right. Sounds inept.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are they still holding on to this guy? And it could be, because he's using a computer while driving or whatever, late to work. But the overall effect of that 27 write-ups, you're like, holy shit.
Well, think about if you're another agency. This guy's been here 5, 10, 15 years, and he moves. He's uprooting and he's forcing to find another job. And you're the recruiter. This guy has 27 different write-ups. Like, do we want that problem? Do we need it? Right. But I think not just administratively, I also think you have problems with society that's demanding these changes, which again, I know we touched on briefly last time. There needs to be a change in policing. There needs to be the way we deal with the public. We need to understand that we are not social workers. We can't solve every problem. And it seems like every problem's dropped on them. And, as I mentioned to you in our last show, that there's things that law enforcement has done that are unforgivable. There's things that they have done that are egregious, and there's people that need to be held accountable. I know we had talked about the George Floyd incident, and, the lack of engagement or from the other officers on scene to interject and stop that is terrible. But the fact that this guy had done that for so long, and he was a senior officer, I think is absolutely terrible. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of events like this, maybe not to this degree, but have occurred, and now they're being on the forefront. Like, you can actually see these things occurring. So I think it's really good to start having these conversations. It's just how we have them. And I just don't know that demanding, everything right up front is the best answer. You have to take a step back and take a breath. But with the way the media and society is, they want instant information right now.
Yeah, I think we saw that play out in a really negative way in Ferguson, right? I think one of the biggest pitfalls from Ferguson is they didn't release the information they had. They let the public and the media control the narrative. So when they actually came out and released the information, it looks like they were hiding something, or it was just really bad optics.
Yeah. And I know that's one thing that PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, talks about, is to control the narrative. So when you have a high priority incident, you get out in front. You want to be the first media release. You want to be the first photos out, the first videos out. You want to be able to control and direct when information, so you're not playing catch up, because you can spin any incident 100 different ways, And I know one thing we used to tell everybody when we go to calls is there's 3 sides to a story. There's, his side, her side, and the truth. Nobody's going to be completely honest with us, and we have to try to whittle down to the middle. So I feel like releasing is probably a good idea, but it's a double-edged sword.
Releasing information is fine, is great. Releasing graphic details or information that doesn't need to be shared, I think that also needs to be evaluated when you're doing that. But just to say nothing at all, it's not going to do anybody any good.
No, and I can tell you from watching these instances for years on the media and stuff, there's different responses from different types of leaders, and one that always drove me nuts, and I couldn't figure out why. The figurehead, whoever it was, the guy in front of the cameras or whatever, he's up there and he's going to tell you that he's either going to give you all the details he has, which, hey, no problem, I have no issue with that, or you have the opposite one, which is, I'm going to go ahead and let so-and-so do their investigation, please refer all questions to them. It almost looks like you're removing yourself as if they had done something wrong. Even if it's completely legitimate, the optics, I think, are terrible, because it doesn't show that you have that support, at least from the outside looking in, for that individual involved in that shooting or other, whatever, incident it was.
Right. So I'm just to touch back, I think one of the big reasons that there is a discontent with law enforcement on the road still is that information sharing, and choosing or not to choose to give out information or whatever transparency they want to be. And then that's a policy that affects morale. There's other policies that affects morale, now that body cameras are out. There's a lot of agencies that are moving away from the taser being a catch device. Yeah.
And I think one thing, obviously, we can jump on at a much later date. It's another one I think you'll have a lot more input than I probably will, is what less lethal options are available to our law enforcement. What do they have at their disposal, and how effective is it, and how often is it ineffective? I think we can kind of dive into all that. I think whenever you look at you start giving the power to society. And a friend of mine had called me, and we were discussing this specifically. And he said, he has a European background, and he's from Europe. He says, the one thing that's different, at least in his opinion, is for Americans, is they don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't need that. And he said, that's kind of like what the country was founded off of, giving the finger to,
exactly.
To the man. And, I think that was a very valid point. So I think we need to learn to delicately balance that. But there are certain parts of society that don't want to be policed. I hate saying, I've driven in neighborhoods before, and you got a 5-year-old, 4-year-old kid, cussing you, and I don't think it's that kid. I think it's the environment. And I don't think us going into that environment and proactively, aggressively policing his friends, his family, his parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, so on and so forth, is effective, because it only instills what he's been told. And I just don't think that there are certain parts of the population that want our involvement. They don't want law enforcement at all. And I think that we need to understand how to balance that between what the society's needs are and what the needs actually are of the country.
Yeah, obviously those certain neighborhoods or whatever, that's what they grew up in. It's their culture or subculture or whatever. So those barriers are going to be hard to break. I think there's a lot of good efforts being made right now, as far as community policing and that kind of thing. But I just wonder what the actual impact of that is. Like, you're only going to get...
Yeah, we need some measurable, data as a result.
Right. Like, you're obviously going to get a certain population, even in that group, that starts to open their eyes and open their hands and stuff. But that's going to be a generational thing, I think.
Yeah, I think we're in it for the long haul. I don't think there's going to be a fast fix to this problem. And I think that we are trying, like, the coffee with a cop, or, you see the news stories where the cops are playing basketball and so on and so forth. But my question is, what are you doing when the cameras are off? What are you doing when your PIO isn't standing there? Like, what relationships are we actually building? When society has to pay, our agencies have to pay slotted positions, funded positions for community engagement, I really feel like we're missing out on what the message of being a public servant was. It was being there. It was just all voluntary. There's certain parts of the country still like volunteer fire departments. There are people that say, hey, you know what, we're going to try to do what we can to try to help each other. And I don't know how to bridge that gap. I think that is obviously the $1 million question, but I think we're starting to understand why. I just think we're going to need that generation of time to rebuild those bonds, because there has been a lot of damage by the release of these videos.
Yeah, I think a big reason for all of that is, that's great. You have community relations, but cops still need to be cops at the end of the day. That's their job, is to protect, and if that means putting a bad guy in jail, it means putting a bad guy in jail. Those community fluff events might not like it, but that's bread and butter of what law enforcement is.
No, it is. I think that's often lost on society is there are bad people in the world. There's some people that need to be punched. There's some people that need to be hit. There's some people that need to be shot and killed. I have no issue with that. If you're an evil person and you're doing evil unto others and it's your comeuppance, then that's what happens. But I don't feel like everything can be solved with knit gloves. I think at some point they have to come off, and you need to do what you have to do to protect others.
Yeah, I mean, again, you do those events and stuff. That's great. That's a one-pronged thing, right? You can't disconnect that and that be your sole thing. But then, like in my own personal experience, you've seen those events rise, and then you see policies come out where some agencies aren't allowing people to do foot pursuits unless they have a felony. It's like, we can't even capture bad guys anymore. I mean,
that goes back to what I was mentioning. Is you're giving the power to who? Like, the power still lies with the government. And one phrase I used to tell people all the time: I don't like the law. I don't have to agree with the law, but I do have to enforce the law. That's my job, or was. My job was to enforce the law. My opinion do I think domestic violence should be an absolute arrest in the state of Florida? No. If me and you are brothers and it's Thanksgiving, you smart off to mom and I knock you on your fucking ass.
Right.
That's what happens. But it doesn't mean, in my opinion, I don't think somebody go to jail. But I always use the thank O.J. Simpson, because, if we're not.
That actually came from a Minnesota study. It's actually
weird. I don't know that
O.J.
O.J. did anything.
No, he probably didn't.
Fabrication.
Yeah, he was found innocent, by the way. Yeah, I think that came from a study in Minnesota, and it was I think it was in the 80s, a very small study, but from that it had a national type of policy change, and that's what domestic violence came out of. And there are a lot who deserve to go to jail for domestic violence.
Absolutely. Sure. No, I've seen them first. And as have you, I've seen a lot of people who are suffering unjustly as a result of somebody else because they were in that situation. So I'm not diminishing that at all, but I think there should be
some discretion.
Yeah.
Like anything else. If you pulled somebody over, and you did that 20-point inspection, let me, make sure your horn works, your windshield wipers, and then you stroked them for every single thing. Well, that's basically what we're doing with DV. That's basically what administrators have started doing with, their personnel as far as policy violation. Here we are. Like, that's not going to create any dialogue or morale boosting for anybody.
Right. And I think also with the videos that people often don't understand is there's some dynamics that are trained in law enforcement. And I think that they are good. I think they're appropriate. And I think that there are times to use them, but there's times that are not. So there's one very simple process that you're taught. It's called ask, tell, make.
Right.
Okay. Ask, tell, make. Ask you to do something, you refuse. Now I'm giving you a lawful order, you refuse. Now I'm going to make you. So obviously that is a very defined series of steps, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a series of breakdowns in between. It could be ask and give time and explain reasons, tell them, try to reason in logic and try to use other means. And then if you have to make them, obviously using the least amount of force.
Right.
And I think that's what de-escalation in theory is.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like that, I mean, the suspect, or whatever you want to call him, the perp for you guys up north, they kind of control your actions, because you can go from ask to make real quick, depending on how they react to you.
Right, but you don't have to either.
No, exactly.
Right.
You don't have to. I mean, obviously, there does come a point, and, we talked about this, and we'll talk about it again, when you hesitate like that, and I think there's been a lot of the things we discussed today makes that hesitation come into play, that's detrimental for everybody involved.
No, and it does. And I think that you'll see that because I've talked to a lot of people at the agency you and I used to work at and several other ones where they're like, man, I just don't want to go out because I just know that if I get into something, I'm going to catch paper. If I know this happens, then, she's like, nobody wants to be plastered on the news for doing something, regardless of good, bad, or indifferent. They want that level of anonymity, but this job takes it from you. And I think that's a problem because when you start stripping that, you start trying to dehumanize that individual because that's a person that still has to deal with these effects. And it's not like 30 years ago where if something were to happen, it was a headline in a paper for a day or two and that's it. But with the internet, it's forever. It's logged for eternity.
Yeah. The information sharing today versus 15 years ago is insane. It's not just any, news station, whatever. It's Joe Schmo with a camera or pumping out their own, podcast or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, and I've seen it firsthand when I was out running training, and I'd watch these videos, do breakdowns of them, and then, you see 5 minutes in that they could have put handcuffs on that person. Like, they already established that they're going to jail.
Right.
And they sit there and talk with them or bicker with them back and forth for 15 more minutes, and then it goes to shit. And you ask, why? And it's like, well, I knew I could, but, hesitated.
Right.
For what? And then they would say, hey, I was afraid that, I would have to go use my taser, and then that brings on an investigation, and just don't want any of that. Don't want the aggravation.
No, and I mean, I think when I got in this, in also with the idea of helping people, I love the idea of running a gun. Going out there and chasing bad guys. I'm not talking about grandma that was doing 28 over. I mean, that's still very dangerous. It doesn't diminish that, but that's not what drove me. I wanted to catch bad guys. I wanted to put bad guys in jail, people that were hurting other people. And I feel that that breed is fewer and farther between. The people that are, hunters, people that actually want to go out and find people to put in jail. And I think that's problematic because they're operating through a lens of fear. They're worried instead of, and I understand another mindset change I think is appropriate to law enforcement is not necessarily having the warrior mindset because we're not in battle 24/7.
Right.
I think you need to be able to function. I think you need to be able to handle yourself appropriately. And I think you need to be able to take decisive action. But I don't feel like we're on the attack.
No, I mean, you're obviously not, but I think you got to be hyper vigilant because you don't know what the enemy looks like.
Right.
It's not a uniform thing. I think that's an added stressor. We'll talk about it at a different time for, a mental episode or whatever. But we're going to share a video here from Brevard County. And me and Nick both worked with this deputy's father. We don't know him personally, but this goes to show exactly how things can go to shit real quick. And, when you need to address evil, that's what you need to do. And hesitation in this kind of thing would have left, a lot more people dead. So without further ado.
Stop. Deputy Tyler Toman talking to a woman while another person rests against the trunk of the sedan. A second deputy, Brian Potters, approaches the vehicle and inside sees a third adult and a baby and also a dog in the back seat. He makes small talk about his own kids and asks the adult to get out of the vehicle.
He wants to talk to you. Is that all you're? Yeah. I'll watch it for you. He's all right. I got babies. Oh, you got a dog too? Hell. I'll make sure they're all right. I got babies too, man.
That's when the car door opens and all hell breaks loose. More than 61 bullets fired in less than a minute. The man with the assault rifle hit in the leg, and Deputy Brian Potter shouts out he's been hit. Deputy Potter's disoriented, not realizing the gunman is right behind him. The gunman hammers Potters in the face with the butt of his rifle, and when Potters goes down, the gunman keeps beating his face, fracturing his sinus and orbital bones. Deputy Tyler Toman drops his spent clip, quickly reloads his gun before unloading it at the man attacking Deputy Potters.
Let there be no doubt. This individual got exactly what he deserved. And to those out there who might be foolish enough to ask why we shot him so many times, that answer is simple. Because evil can never be dead enough.
Are faced with a threat that, they're just shooting the shit on the side of the road and nothing seems to be going awry, but they're still on alert. And then, the guy pops out with that, rifle or whatever. That's terrifying. And if
It is.
Yeah. And those things, if you hesitate on that, have a nice day, man. I hope you kissed your family goodbye this morning.
And that's the scariest part about it is I don't think this wasn't in the middle of, in the middle of a ghetto somewhere where you're pulling over, a bunch of, people that you suspect are criminals. I don't know the entire premise of the background story, but this guy pops out with a it looks like an AR pistol, and starts just cranking rounds at them. And I don't know if you noticed, but he was hit, I believe, in the left leg, and he's still on the attack. You know what I mean? And
they lose sight. You saw they lose sight of him.
Right.
Man, that's even worse.
Oh, it's fucking, dude, it's terrifying. And that's how quick things go badly. And I think that's why hesitating and not taking that decisive action, it can be costly, and unfortunately I know that I've talked to certain people where they said, oh, well, I was going to, but, right. or we should have done this, but I was going, they
could have, but
yeah, instead of let's doing sometimes you have to do that. But I think also to kind of touch on that as well, but in another extreme where if you have somebody who's mentally, in a mental crisis, giving that person that time, giving them that distance, talking to them instead of taking that decisive action is where that model needs to be broke down a little more. And I think that's what de-escalation is. And I believe that that's one of the things that's getting lost whenever they're pitching it to the rank and file, because they're seeing it, at least in my opinion, they're almost seeing it like, well, I got to be hands off.
Right.
Like, no, I think each circumstance should warrant, but also should be incumbent upon the administration to understand that they need to teach that a little further. Like, we understand that sometimes, you need to smack people. We get it. But if we can, if we can talk them into handcuffs, we can. But that is absolutely terrifying, man. I think I would, honestly, I'd be candid with you. If it was that close, I would have, a gentleman we worked with, his name's Tommy. I will leave his last name off. He got shot in the head from a guy running away, pointing the gun back over his shoulder.
Yeah, bad guy luck, right?
Bad guy luck. Hit him right in the forehead. Thank God bless. Hit him in the forehead, skipped and basically went up and came out in the top of his hat. Shot him in the head from about, 10 yards maybe at most, while running the opposite direction.
Yeah. If he probably had new boots on and they weren't, scuffed down a little bit, it probably wouldn't have been the outcome it was.
Right. I mean,
that's how close it was.
Yeah. And it's a scary video. It's an absolutely scary video. We may bring that one in one time a little in the future, but these are the type of scenarios where I think that decisive action needs to be taken, and they did a great job. They really, truly did. But I'll tell you, in addition to the deputies, because, they had their guardian angels with them, another person that I think also deserves, 5 golden tickets from us is their Sheriff Wayne Ivey.
Yeah.
Tell him about the shirts that he had put out afterwards.
Yeah. So after that shooting, there was a lot of questions about why that deputy fired so many rounds. And obviously you saw the result of that. So the sheriff there went on a promo deal basically, and wanted to promote his view of it, even if it was controversial. And they made shirts and, got some money for him. Talk #MagDump.
Yeah,
right?
#MagDump, because he dumped the whole mag into this guy. And I don't know this guy. I don't know the story, but he deserves to be dead.
Oh, absolutely.
After he put not only those officers, those other 2 or 3 bystanders, every car, everybody in the area. He had no regard for public safety. He had no regard for any other person except for his own selfish needs. So good for those 2 deputies to take care of him. But I think on top of that, he tells him, evil can't be dead enough. You can't shoot this guy enough. He can't be any more dead to be okay with us. And I appreciate that outlook. And I think that's a different mindset that he goes back to when cops need to be cops.
Yeah. And Grady Judd does the same kind of thing, right? Like, we had a shooting, I think it was 05 or 06. They had a shooting where the guy killed the deputy and his dog, took his, service weapon out, and SWAT shot like 168 rounds at him. And there's, again, a lot of scrutiny of why we ran out of bullets.
That's it. Yeah. And I'm not shooting to wound you. Right. I'm not shooting to maim you. I'm not even shooting to kill you. I'm shooting to stop you. If you die as a result, oh well. If you live as a result, oh well. But my job is to stop you from doing whatever evil you're in the process of doing. And in firsthand experience, we had a gentleman was wanted for attempted murder. He went to a house with a ex-associate. I assume they're not friends anymore. Knocks on the guy's door. Boom, 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 boom. Victim opens the door and point blank shoots him a couple times. The guy ends up living. So we come in contact with him. There's a pursuit. There's a wreck, and he gets out and he charges at one of our coworkers with a pistol and begins to shoot at him. And thankfully, one of my deputies was there, started returning fire back at him. The guy runs, and as luck would have it, angels on our side for once. There was a city officer that just happened to see us setting up stop sticks,
right?
Bust a U-turn. He jumps out with his SWAT rifle, and he puts a couple rounds in this guy and stops him. The guy ends up living. great. Yeah, you know what, you live. But our goal was to stop that guy from doing the evil he was doing. I mean, he was obviously out to kill somebody. He shot somebody point blank at a door. He charged at one of our officers. I mean, this guy is as dangerous. And if somebody innocent would have been killed by this guy because we let him go, what would be the ramifications of that? How would you handle that? But we can't. So that's why you need that decisive action.
Yeah. And I think, cops hate two things: change and the way things are.
Oh yeah. Mostly how they are.
Yeah. So when de-escalation came out, at least for me in the agency that I was in, there was a lot of pushback internally because there wasn't a whole lot of communication on what that actually meant. It just seemed like that, hands off, broad brush, we're not doing anything anymore. And I think that the communication is lost a lot of the times. That it's great when it needs to be implemented. There's times there's not, just like this video we saw. Time distance, in protection is great, but when shit hits the fan, I mean, sorry, that's out the window.
Right. And that's one thing that I think that having conversations with our prior sheriff, that I was definitely 100% in agreement with his position, is the sanctity of human life. Our idea is to preserve life. We're not out warriors out on the battlefield of, trying to just survive. We're out here providing a service. You might be out, helping somebody because somebody got their car broke into, or, a kid got locked in the car in the summertime, or whatever. Like, you have such a wide variety of jobs. You have to understand that ability is only needed a fraction of a time, but tact and compassion and empathy and understanding that different races and different religions and different cultures have different ways they deal with stress and situation. And I was talking to my friend, the one who's European, the other day, in the country he's from. I told him, I said, you guys are you're hand talkers. You know what I mean? So when you're mad, you're angry, everything's going. I was knocking my water flying. They grab you, they touch you. That's how they tell stories. They're very personal. They're very in your face. They're very aggressive. They're loud, but they don't mean you harm. So if you don't understand how to perceive that, people unfortunately do things like that. Whether it's, like I talked about, the cultural thing, or even people who are mentally in a mental crisis, that you have to understand the world that they live in is not your world.
Yeah. And to wrap things up, I think at the end of the day, we just need to let cops be cops again.
I agree. And I think that's one thing that we have to do, is allow them to do their job.
Yeah. It's great, the pandering and stuff like that. Like, it's great for PR stuff, but brass tacks is this. And we'll end it again here with Sheriff Wayne Ivey in one of his newest promo videos about identifying as a cop.
Yeah, and he's going to get 5 more tickets for us. And Sheriff, if you're listening, they're good for nothing and redeemable nowhere, but you can hold on to them if you'd like. So for Heroed Out, again, I'm Nick, and across from me is Kyle. And as always, our show is uncut, just as my friend is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sheriff Wayne Ivey of the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, and I identify as a cop.
I'm Angel Reddy, and I identify as a cop.
I'm Paul Phillips, and I identify as a cop.
I'm Norma Castillo, and I identify as a cop.
I'm Sly Harris, and I identify as a cop.
I'm Amanda Lesperance, and I identify as a cop.
I am Miguel Melendez, and I identify as a cop.
And if you identify as a cop that likes to put bad people in jail, then the Brevard County Sheriff's Office is the place for you. Oh, and by the way, if you currently work for an agency head that doesn't identify as a real cop and won't let you do your job, then you definitely need to come to work for me, because I believe in targeting criminals before they can target our citizens. So if you're ready to serve in a community that has zero tolerance for crime and loves its law enforcement officers, please visit identifyazacop.com.
Visit us at heroedout.com or on our social media. Be safe out there, heroes.